Okay, I just want to talk a little bit about the screenings themselves, because I think that's one thing that makes this mud a little bit different than using regular sand. Basically, if the screenings get wet, they'll get hard like this, so they obviously have some sort of like mud-like qualities to it, but it breaks apart if you apply a pressure or whatever. But anyway, the thing I like about this is the powder basically mixes with the mud and creates like a rock, and I hardly get in the upcoming video when you'll see the walls, you won't see hardly any cracks. And right from the get-go, even if I put it on fairly thick, it barely cracks. So I think that this is a lot better to use than regular sand. Then I wanted to show you what it looks like if it's been sitting for for about a day. So this is some of the stuff that we've mixed up already. And it's been sitting for like 24 hours basically. So if you wanted to get thicker mud, you can just pour this watery stuff off until you get all the water off, like about now. And if you see at the bottom of the bucket, it's really thick. So if you wanted to get thicker stuff, you could just pour basically the top off, and it starts to get thicker. And then you just keep that, pour the top off of that, pour the top off of that, add all the thick stuff, and you could get really thick mud if that's what you wanted. Then these have been washed a few times. Basically that's the mud after a couple of washings. Comes out like that. After it's been washed a lot, it won't stick to your hand as well. And so this will probably get one more washing and then it'll be done. And I'll just toss that out. The only other thing I wanted to mention was it was hard for me to find this metal mesh, mostly because I wasn't looking in the right place. They don't have it at the big box stores like Lowe's or Home Depot. I only found it at a local hardware store, and it's called hardware cloth, not like metal mesh. So that's 1/8 inch hardware cloth, and if you look that up, you'll probably find it at a local hardware store, not a big box store. Anyway, I think that's it. Okay, today I just want to talk a little bit about clay and what I call screenings, or what the locals here call screenings. These are screenings from a local rock quarry, so it's not sand. And the thing you might notice about this is that it's got a lot of powder in it, and it also has these bigger clumps. What I've done a couple of times is screened out the bigger clumps using 1/8 inch hardware screen, and after you do that, basically you get this powdered stuff without the grit, and that's for the final coat. I've been using just regular screenings like that for most of the building, but when I get to the final coat I'm going to use just that. But I did want to talk about clay. This is like, if you just dig out clay out of the dirt, you'll have harder pieces like this, which you don't want to mix up right off the bat. What you really want to do is get it down to something moist like this, so you can at least crumble it, and you'll know it's clay if it sticks to your fingers. One way to get it from big clumps like this to smaller clumps like this, and even to powder like this, is not to screen it, but just leave it out in the rain. I left clumps like this out in the rain for a few months, and it turned to powder like this. So instead of using your own labor to smash it or sift it or do anything like that, just leave it out in the rain, in a pile, and it'll turn like this. Okay, what I wanted to show you is a way of mixing the good clumps like this. You're going to want to get things like that out of there if you can, but if you can't, don't worry about it. So, about that much clay. A lot of water. The drywall paddle. You might notice that this paddle has been used so many times that the metal's been worn off. That's how it starts out. You mix up a bunch of buckets and it practically wears the metal right off, just from the sand alone. Mix it up real good. You notice that some stuff floats to the top. I didn't get a bunch of clay on there either because it was already small enough pieces. If you try and do big clumps like that, it'll just clog this whole thing up. So right after that, pour it out. There should be no clumps of mud coming out. It should be all liquid. Basically a lot of water, a little bit of clay is what's happening right now. Get to the end. See all the mud stays at the bottom. Okay. Basically let that sit at least a few hours, if not overnight. This bucket was mixed up this morning, so it's only been a few hours, and we're going to pour off the water, see what we got. I usually like to leave it for a whole overnight period because you just get a better separation of water to clay. So this has only been a few hours, but you can start to see the clay at the bottom. And the finer stuff will start to leak out. Don't worry about that. Now if I'd left this in overnight, let this sit overnight, I'd have even thicker stuff on the bottom, but I just looked and there really isn't any thicker stuff. So if you want thicker clay, you need to let it sit longer. So basically that's as watery as it's going to get or as thick as it's going to get. If you leave it overnight, you're going to get thicker stuff like that. And you can pour off the thinner and keep the thicker, and you can make it as thick as you want. If you notice on the bucket, the clay is sticking to the side. You want to have it be like that. You want the clay thick enough to where if you stick your finger in, it's going to hold. Okay, so when I measure it, I basically just use my paddle, and if it covers the top of the paddle like that, that's just a starting point. If you want it thicker, thinner, it all depends on how watery it is. But if you notice, it's sticking to the paddle. It's pretty watery. But the thing about screenings is they're pretty dry. And the powder comes in. Now these screenings haven't been, the bigger particles have not been screened out. This is just regular not store-bought, but at the quarry screenings. So you can see the ratio is pretty high. I don't know if you can hear it or not, but when the drill starts pretty much done. I usually try to make it as thick as I can. You can hear the drill's having a little bit of trouble, right? Okay, you can see how thick I make it. That's a pretty much done deal. Now if you want to know if it's got enough stick to it, if you put it on your hand and it doesn't slide off, and you put it on the wall, it's not going to slide off either. So if you mix this up too watery, it would just fall off. You can make it too much clay if you want, but as long as it's sticking to your hand, you see how my hand's covered in clay and it's staying on the side, good enough to go. Anyway, I think that's it about mud.